Rain hammered the hospital windows the night she sold herself to save her father's life. Behind her, machines beeped rhythmically while debt collectors circled like vultures. Across the sterile room stood Dario Falcone, New York's most feared mafia boss, his amber eyes cold as winter stone. The deal was brutally simple: marriage for protection. No love, no escape. Just survival wrapped in wedding vows neither of them believed. But when their paper contract collided with real bullets, real betrayal, and something far more dangerous than either expected, Selene Vale discovered that marrying the devil himself might be the only way to stay alive long enough to find out if monsters can actually fall in love. If you want to see how far a contract marriage can spiral into obsession and violence, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. Look, the fluorescent lights in Mount Sinai's ICU flickered twice before holding steady, casting shadows across Michael Vale's unconscious face. Selene stood beside his bed, her fingers wrapped around his cold hand, counting the rhythmic beeps of the heart monitor like a lifeline she didn't trust. 72 hours ago, her father had collapsed on the subway platform during rush hour. A stroke, the doctor said. A massive one. The kind that left grown men vegetative and families financially destroyed. The kind that attracted predators. Miss Vale? She turned. A doctor she didn't recognize stood in the doorway, clipboard pressed against his chest like armor. Behind him, two men in expensive suits waited in the hallway, their presence wrong in every way that mattered. We need to discuss your father's care, the doctor continued, but his eyes kept sliding toward the men behind him. Selene's throat tightened. What about it? The surgery he needs, the specialist, the rehabilitation, it's going to cost approximately $400,000. Your insurance covers maybe 30%. The number hit like a fist to the sternum. She'd known it would be bad. She hadn't known it would be impossible. I'll figure it out, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The doctor glanced back at the suited men. One of them stepped forward, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Miss Vale, my name is Vincent Marchetti. I represent certain financial interests that your father acquired debts with over the past 18 months. Ice flooded her veins. What debts? Gambling debts, loan shark debts, the kind that compound daily. Marchetti pulled a folded paper from his jacket. Currently sitting at $217,000, plus interest. The room tilted. That's impossible. My father doesn't gamble. Desperate men do desperate things when their daughters are drowning in student loans and medical bills of their own. Marchetti's eyes were empty of sympathy. He tried to help you. Made some bad bets. Borrowed from the wrong people. Selene's hand tightened around her father's fingers. She wanted to scream that this was a lie, that her father would never be that reckless. But the truth sat like lead in her stomach. She'd been sick last year. Rare autoimmune disease. Experimental treatments not covered by insurance. She told him not to worry about the bills. He'd worried anyway. I don't have that kind of money, she whispered. We know. Marchetti stepped closer. But our employer has a proposition. I'm not interested in... Dario Falcone wants to meet you. The name stopped her cold. Everyone in New York knew that name, the ghost king who controlled half the city's underground, the man federal prosecutors had been chasing for a decade without ever making a single charge stick. The kind of power that didn't negotiate, it consumed. Why would someone like him care about my father's debts? Marchetti's smile widened. He doesn't. He cares about you. The words made her skin crawl. I've never even met him. He's seen you, that's enough. Marchetti placed a business card on the bedside table. Midnight. The address on the card. Come alone, or the debt collectors visit your father's room tomorrow morning. And Miss Vale, they won't be as polite as I am. They left before she could respond, their footsteps echoing down the hallway like a countdown clock she couldn't stop. The address led to a penthouse in Tribeca that occupied the entire 73rd floor of a building Selene had walked past 1,000 times without ever imagining what existed inside. Security swept her with handheld devices, confiscated her phone, and escorted her into an elevator that required a fingerprint scanner to activate. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world carved from marble, glass, and shadows. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan like a kingdom laid out for inspection. The furniture looked Italian, expensive, untouchable. Everything gleamed with the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, confident and absolute. Miss Vale? She turned. Dario Falcone stood near the windows, a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. His charcoal suit fitted so perfectly it looked like a second skin. He was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with dark hair swept back from a face that would have been beautiful if not for the hardness carved into every angle. His eyes were the color of old gold, calculating and cold. Mr. Falcone. Her voice didn't shake. Small victory. You came. He sounded almost surprised. Brave or desperate? Does it matter? Not really. He gestured toward a leather chair. Sit. She remained standing. I'd rather know why I'm here. Something flickered across his expression, amusement maybe, or appreciation. Your father owes money to people I control. Those people want payment. I don't have it. I know. He took a slow sip of his drink. But I have a different kind of currency in mind. Her stomach twisted. I'm not marriage. The word hung between them like a detonation. Selene stared at him. Excuse me? A legal marriage, courthouse, paperwork, binding contract. Dario set down his glass with deliberate precision. You become my wife. In exchange, your father's debts disappear. His medical care gets handled by the best specialists in the country. You both walk away alive and protected. Protected from what? From everyone. His eyes locked onto hers. My enemies. Your father's creditors. Anyone who might think you're vulnerable enough to exploit. Why would you possibly want to marry someone you've never even spoken to? I have my reasons. That's not an answer. Dario moved closer and Selene forced herself not to retreat. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne and something darker beneath it. Gunpowder, maybe, or the metallic tang of violence barely contained. You want honesty? His voice dropped. I need a wife for appearances. The kind of wife who looks good in photographs and doesn't ask questions. In return, you get protection, money, and your father's life. It's a transaction, nothing more. For how long? 2 years? Then we divorce quietly, you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want, and we never see each other again. Selene's mind raced. This was insane. Marrying a stranger. No, marrying a criminal to pay off debts and save her father. But the alternative was watching him die in a hospital bed while loan sharks circled, waiting to pick her apart piece by piece. I need time to think. You have 30 seconds. That's not 25. Her hands curled into fists. You can't just 20. This is insane, like 15. Her father's face flashed through her mind. The way he'd smiled when she graduated college. The way he'd held her hand through every hospital visit during her illness. The way he'd sacrificed everything to keep her safe. 10 seconds, Miss Vale. She closed her eyes. Yes. The word came out barely louder than a breath, but Dario heard it. When she opened her eyes, his expression hadn't changed. Still cold, still unreadable, still terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. Smart choice. He pulled out his phone and sent a text. We'll handle the courthouse tomorrow at noon. My lawyers will have the paperwork ready. Just like that? Just like that. He walked back to the windows, dismissing her with his posture. Vincent will take you home. Don't tell anyone about this arrangement. Not friends, not family, not anyone. My father will be told you married someone who can afford his care. Nothing more. Selene wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from whatever nightmare she'd stumbled into. Instead, she stood frozen in a penthouse 73 floors above the city, realizing she'd just sold herself to the devil in a charcoal suit. Miss Vale, Dario's voice stopped her at the elevator. One more thing. She turned. Don't mistake this for kindness. I'm not saving you. I'm acquiring an asset. His amber eyes held no mercy. Remember that. The elevator doors closed on his face, and Selene finally let herself shake. The courthouse wedding took 11 minutes. No flowers, no guests, no music, Just Selene in a simple white dress she'd bought at a department store that morning, and Dario in another perfectly tailored suit, standing before a judge who looked bored enough to be presiding over a parking ticket hearing. "Do you, Dario Falcone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was flat, mechanical, completely devoid of emotion. "And do you, Selene Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her throat felt lined with broken glass. "I do. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife." No kiss. Dario signed the marriage certificate with brutal efficiency, his signature a slash of black ink across official paper. Celine's hand trembled as she added her own name below his, making the nightmare legally binding. Outside, rain hammered against the courthouse steps. Thunder rolled across the city like artillery fire. "Your things have been moved to the penthouse," Dario said, not looking at her. "You'll have the east wing. Stay out of my way." A black SUV pulled up to the curb. Dario opened the door and waited, his face carved from stone. Selene climbed inside. The ride back to Tribeca happened in suffocating silence. She stared out the rain-streaked windows while Manhattan blurred past, wondering how her life had collapsed so completely in less than 24 hours. Yesterday, she'd been a medical researcher with student loans and a sick father. Today, she was the wife of the most dangerous man in New York. The penthouse felt even more oppressive the second time. Dario led her through hallways lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her entire education. He stopped at a set of double doors. "Your rooms." He pushed them open, revealing a suite that could have housed a family of 5. Bedroom, sitting area, walk-in closet, bathroom, with marble everywhere. Her few possessions looked pathetic scattered across the king-sized bed. "Everything you need is here. Staff will handle meals and cleaning. Don't wander into the West Wing." "What's in the West Wing?" "My business, which is none of yours." "We're married now. Doesn't that make it—" "No." The word came out sharp enough to draw blood. "Let me be very clear, Miss Vale. This marriage is a legal arrangement, nothing more. You have my name for protection. That's where our relationship ends." "It's Mrs. Falcone now," she said quietly. Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or irritation. "In public, yes. In private, we're strangers who happen to share an address." He turned to leave. "Why me?" The question escaped before Selene could stop it. Dario paused in the doorway, his back to her. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because you don't belong to this world," he finally said. "And I needed someone clean." "Clean?" "Untouched by the kind of corruption that infects everyone around me. Someone the FBI can't connect to my operations. Someone who looks innocent in photographs." He glanced back over his shoulder. "Someone forgettable." The word landed like a slap. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut with finality. Selene stood alone in her gilded cage, rain hammering against windows that didn't open, and let herself cry for the first time since her father collapsed. The first week passed in a blur of isolation. Selene rarely saw Dario. He left before dawn and returned after midnight, a ghost haunting his own penthouse. The staff moved around her with polite efficiency, but avoided conversation beyond what was strictly necessary. She felt like a museum piece, expensive, untouchable, ultimately meaningless. Her father had been transferred to a private facility in Connecticut. The doctors there reported miraculous improvement. State-of-the-art care, they said. Experimental treatments, money-solving problems medicine alone couldn't touch. She wanted to visit, but Dario's head of security, a granite-faced man named Marco, informed her that leaving the penthouse required advance approval and armed escort. "It's for your protection, Mrs. Falcone." The name still felt foreign in her mouth. She spent most of her time in the penthouse's library, a room lined floor to ceiling with books that looked expensive but unread. During one particularly desperate afternoon, she pulled down a leather-bound copy of The Count of Monte Cristo and found a photograph tucked between the pages. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, grinned at the camera. Dark hair, bright eyes, skinny arms wrapped around a woman who had Dario's bone structure but softer edges. They stood in front of a small house with peeling paint and a chain-link fence. Before Selene could examine it further, the library door opened. Dario stood there, his suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. His eyes went immediately to the photograph in her hands. Put that back. I didn't mean to. Put it back. She carefully replaced the photo, heart hammering. Dario crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled the book from the shelf, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. This room is off limits. You didn't tell me that. I'm telling you now. He shoved the book back into place with barely controlled violence. Stay out of my things. I was just reading. Read somewhere else. They stood 3 feet apart, tension crackling between them like electricity before a lightning strike. Up close, Selene noticed details she'd missed before. The scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly before he shoved them into his pockets. Who was she? Selene asked quietly. The woman in the photo. No one. His voice went flat. Ancient history. She looked like you. Drop it. Was she your... I said drop it. Dario's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You want to know the rules of this marriage? Here they are. Don't ask about my past. Don't ask about my business. Don't ask about anything that doesn't directly concern your survival in this arrangement. We're not friends. We're not confidants. We're barely even strangers. Then what are we? A transaction that talks. The words should have hurt more than they did. Instead, Selene felt something cold settle into her chest, a kind of resignation that tasted like ashes. Fine. She moved toward the door. I'll stay out of your way. She made it 2 steps before Dario spoke again. Your father asked about you. Selene stopped. The facility called earlier. He's awake, coherent, asking when you're going to visit. Dario's voice remained carefully neutral. I told them you'd be there tomorrow afternoon. Marco will drive you. Something cracked in Selene's chest. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's part of the arrangement. But when she glanced back, Dario was staring at the bookshelf where he'd hidden the photograph, his expression unreadable and utterly alone. Geek. The facility in Connecticut looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Her father's room had a view of gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. He sat propped up in bed, color returning to his face, looking more alive than he had in months. Selene, his voice cracked. Baby girl. She collapsed into the chair beside his bed, tears streaming freely now. Dad? They told me you got married. His eyes searched her face. To someone who can afford all this. Yeah. The lie tasted like poison. His name is Dario. Is he good to you? Selene forced a smile. He's taking care of everything. Her father's hand squeezed hers. I'm so sorry. The debts, Don't. She cut him off. None of that matters now. Just focus on getting better. They talked for an hour about nothing important. Hospital food, physical therapy, the nurse who reminded him of his late wife. Surface-level conversation that avoided the abyss beneath. When visiting hours ended, Selene kissed his forehead and promised to return soon. Marco waited in the hallway, massive and silent. The drive back to Manhattan took 90 minutes. Selene watched Connecticut blur into Westchester blur, into the Bronx blur into the city, feeling the weight of her decision settling deeper into her bones with every mile. She'd sold herself to save her father, and somehow she'd have to learn to live with that. Back. The penthouse felt different when she returned. Darker, somehow. The staff had gone home for the night, leaving only security posted at invisible stations throughout the building. Selene wandered through empty hallways, her footsteps echoing against marble floors. Music stopped her cold. Piano music, soft and haunting, drifting from somewhere deeper in the penthouse. She followed the sound through corridors she'd never explored before, past abstract paintings and sculptures that probably cost more than her father's entire medical care. The music led to a room at the far end of the West Wing, the wing Dario had explicitly forbidden. The door stood slightly ajar. Selene knew she should turn back. Knew she was violating the only real rule he'd given her. But something about the music, the raw emotion bleeding through each note, pulled her forward like gravity. She peered through the crack. Dario sat at a grand piano, his back to the door, fingers moving across the keys with devastating gentleness. He'd stripped down to a white shirt, the sleeves still rolled up, his jacket discarded on a nearby chair. The room around him was sparse. No furniture except the piano, no decorations, nothing but empty space and shadows. He played like a man confessing sins to an empty room. The melody was beautiful and heartbreaking, each note carrying weight that had nothing to do with music theory and everything to do with pain carefully controlled. This wasn't the cold, calculating mafia boss who'd bought her like property. This was someone else entirely, someone vulnerable and lonely and desperately human. Selene must have made a sound because Dario's hands froze mid-chord. He turned slowly, his expression shifting from vulnerability to fury in less than a heartbeat. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I heard music." "I told you to stay out of the West Wing." He stood, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "That wasn't a suggestion." "I'm sorry, I just what? Decided the rules don't apply to you?" He stalked toward her, and Selene instinctively backed into the hallway. "You think because we signed some papers, you get access to parts of my life I haven't offered?" "No, Get out!" "Dario, get out!" The roar echoed through the empty corridors. Selene fled back to her wing, her heart hammering against her ribs, shame and fear mixing into something that tasted like bile. She didn't see him again for 3 days. Kicks. On the fourth night, Dario finally emerged from whatever hole he'd been hiding in. Selene sat in the main living area, trying to read a book she wasn't actually processing, when he walked past without acknowledging her existence. He looked worse than before. Dark circles under his eyes, his shirt wrinkled, stubble shadowing his jaw. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He stopped but didn't turn around. "For going into the West Wing, for invading your privacy. I was wrong." Silence stretched between them like a chasm. "My mother played piano," Dario finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She taught me when I was a kid, before everything went to hell." Selene held her breath, afraid that speaking would shatter whatever fragile moment this was. "She died when I was 12, lung cancer. We couldn't afford treatment." His shoulders tensed. After that, piano was the only thing that felt clean, untouched by the rest of my life. "Didn't know." "You're not supposed to know." He turned then, his amber eyes meeting hers across the room. "That's the whole point of this arrangement. I bought your presence, not your understanding." "Is that really all you want? Someone who exists near you but never actually sees you?" "Yes." The answer came too fast, too sharp. Selene recognized a lie when she heard one. "I don't believe you," she said softly. Something dangerous flickered across Dario's face. "You should. If you really wanted someone forgettable, someone who'd disappear into the wallpaper, you wouldn't have chosen me." Selene set down her book, her hands steadier than she expected. "You would have hired an actress, someone trained to play a part without question. But you picked a medical researcher with student loans and a dying father. Someone real, someone who'd push back." "You're giving yourself too much credit." "Am I?" She stood. "Then why did you make sure my father got the best care available? Why did you let me visit him when you could have just transferred money and been done with it? Why do you play piano in a locked room instead of just hiring someone to provide background music? Stop. Why do you pretend to be this emotionless monster when I've seen—" "I said stop." Dario crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to hurt. His face was inches from hers, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild with something she couldn't name. "You don't know what you've seen," he growled. "You don't know anything about me." "Then tell me." "No." "Why not?" "Because the things I've done, the person I actually am, would make you run screaming back to whatever normal life you think you lost." His grip loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "You want honesty?" "I've killed people, Selene. Not in self-defense, not in the heat of moment. Deliberately, methodically. I've destroyed families, ruined lives, built an empire on suffering I engineered myself." "I know what you are." "You know the reputation. You don't know the reality." "Then show me." The words hung between them like a dare. Dario stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working, his eyes searching her face for something she didn't understand. Then, abruptly, he released her wrist and stepped back. "You want to see reality? Fine." He pulled out his phone and sent a text. "Tomorrow night, there's a meeting I need to attend. You're coming with me." What kind of meeting? The kind that'll remind you exactly who you married. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Selene alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that she'd just pushed open a door she could never close. The next evening, Marco delivered a dress to her room. Floor-length emerald silk that probably cost more than a semester's tuition, accompanied by jewelry that looked like it belonged in a museum. Selene stared at the ensemble laid out on her bed, her stomach churning. This was a mistake. She should have kept her mouth shut, stayed in her gilded cage, let Dario keep his walls intact. Instead, she'd pushed, and now she'd be dragged into whatever darkness he'd been trying to shield her from. But backing down now felt like admitting defeat. She dressed carefully, applied minimal makeup, and tried not to think about what the night ahead might reveal. Dario waited in the living room, wearing a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped out of a crime thriller. His eyes swept over her once, clinical, assessing, before he nodded toward the elevator. Don't speak unless I tell you to. Don't make eye contact with anyone. And whatever you see tonight, keep your face neutral. Where are we going? A business meeting. That's not an answer. His smile was colder than winter. You wanted reality. Here it is. The car took them to a waterfront warehouse in Red Hook, the kind of place that looked abandoned but definitely wasn't. Armed men in expensive suits checked them at the entrance. Their eyes lingering on Selene with interest, Dario shut down with a single look. Inside, the warehouse had been converted into something surreal. A ballroom straight out of a gangster movie, complete with crystal chandeliers, a full bar, and approximately 50 people who all looked like they belonged on FBI wanted posters. Mr. Falcone. A man with silver hair and a European accent approached, his smile sharp. And the new Mrs. Falcone. Congratulations on your marriage. Constantine. Dario's hand settled possessively on Selene's lower back. This is my wife, Selene. A pleasure. Constantine's eyes were predatory. Your reputation precedes you, though the reality is far more beautiful than the rumors suggested. You're too kind. Not at all. In fact, I was just telling Mikhail here that Dario's choice of bride speaks volumes about his impeccable taste. The conversation continued in circles of veiled threats disguised as compliments. Selene smiled and nodded in the right places, playing the part of decorative wife while her mind cataloged every detail. These weren't businessmen in the conventional sense. These were the heads of criminal empires, Russian, Italian, Irish, Chinese, gathered under one roof like a united nations of violence, and Dario moved among them like royalty. An hour into the night, things shifted. A disturbance near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Raised voices, the sound of furniture scraping, then a gunshot that made Selene's blood freeze. The ballroom erupted. Someone tackled Dario, slamming him into a nearby table. Selene screamed as glass shattered around them. Armed men poured in from hidden exits, shouting in languages she didn't understand. Marco appeared from nowhere, grabbed Selene, and dragged her toward a back corridor while chaos exploded behind them. She caught glimpses of Dario fighting off 3 attackers with brutal efficiency, his face transformed into something terrifying and beautiful in its controlled violence. Then Marco shoved her through a door, and everything went dark. When her vision cleared, she was in a concrete hallway that smelled like oil and rust. Marco had a gun in his hand, his expression grim. Stay behind me, don't run unless I tell you to. What's happening? Ambush. Someone leaked the meeting location. Dario can handle himself. My job is keeping you alive. More gunshots echoed from the ballroom. Selene's hands shook so hard she had to clench them into fists to maintain control. This was insane. This was her life now, running through warehouse hallways while armed men tried to kill her husband. Her husband. The reality hit her like a freight train. Somewhere back in that ballroom, Dario was fighting for his life, and she cared. Despite everything, despite the cold arrangement and the walls between them, she actually cared whether he survived. Marco's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Change of plans. We're compromised on all exits. Mr. Falcone wants us to head for the roof. The roof? Helicopter extraction. Move. They ran. Selene's heels clattered against metal stairs as they climbed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Below them, the sounds of violence continued. More gunshots, shouting, the sickening thud of bodies hitting concrete. They burst onto the roof into cold night air and the deafening roar of helicopter blades. A black aircraft hovered 10 feet above them, rope ladder already deployed. "Climb!" Marco shouted. Selene grabbed the ladder with shaking hands and pulled herself up, the silk dress tangling around her legs. The world spun beneath her, Brooklyn stretching out in all directions, the warehouse 3 stories below, armed men spilling onto the roof. She made it into the helicopter just as gunfire erupted from below. Marco climbed after her, moving with surprising speed for his size. The pilot pulled them higher, and Selene watched the warehouse shrink beneath them, her heart in her throat. "Where's Dario?" she shouted over the noise. Marco's expression was grim. "Still inside." "We can't just leave him. Those were his orders. Get you to safety first." "I don't care about his orders. We have to—" The helicopter lurched sideways. Through the open door, Selene saw him, Dario, sprinting across the roof with 3 men in pursuit, his suit jacket gone, blood on his white shirt. He reached the edge of the building and didn't hesitate. He jumped. For one horrible second, he hung suspended against the night sky. Then his hands caught the rope ladder. The helicopter dipped dangerously under the sudden weight. Dario hauled himself up, rung by rung, while bullets chased him, his face set in lines of pure determination. Selene reached down instinctively. "Give me your hand! Get back!" he shouted. "Take my hand!" Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or the first crack in the walls he'd built so carefully. Dario grabbed her hand. She pulled with strength she didn't know she had, and together they dragged him into the helicopter as it banked hard over the East River. He collapsed against the seat, breathing hard, blood dripping from a cut above his eyebrow. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dario looked at her, really looked at her, and said the last thing she expected. "You should have let Marco take you to safety." "I wasn't going to leave you behind. That's exactly what you should have done." "Well, I didn't." His amber eyes held something she'd never seen before. Not gratitude exactly. Something more complicated. Something that looked almost like fear. "You're bleeding," Selene said, reaching toward his face. Dario caught her wrist but didn't push her away. His grip was gentle this time, his thumb brushing against her pulse point. "You don't belong in this world," he said quietly. "I'm already in it." "You could still walk away. I'd arrange—" "No!" The word came out harder than she intended. Dario's expression shifted into something unreadable. "Why not?" Selene didn't have an answer that made sense. She should want to run, should be terrified, should be planning her escape from this nightmare marriage the second the helicopter landed. Instead, she was sitting in an aircraft streaked with her husband's blood, her hand still caught in his, feeling more alive than she had in months. "I don't know," she admitted. Dario stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he released her wrist and turned to look out the window, at Manhattan growing larger beneath them. But his hand found hers in the darkness between their seats, and neither of them let go. The helicopter touched down on a private helipad in Queens 40 minutes after they escaped the warehouse. Dario released Selene's hand the moment the skids hit concrete, his face shifting back into the cold mask she'd come to recognize as his default expression. Blood still dripped from the cut above his eyebrow, staining his torn white shirt, but he moved like the wound didn't exist. "Take her to the safe house in Astoria," he told Marco. "I'll meet you there in 2 hours." "You need medical attention," Selene said. "I need to figure out who the hell set us up." Dario stepped out of the helicopter without looking back at her. "Marco, get her out of here." "Wait." But he was already gone, disappearing into a black SUV that peeled away before she could finish the sentence. Marco touched her elbow gently. "Mrs. Falcone, this way." The safe house turned out to be a nondescript brownstone tucked between a bodega and a laundromat, the kind of building you'd walk past 1,000 times without noticing. Inside it was sparse, functional furniture, reinforced windows, security cameras covering every angle, a place designed for survival, not comfort. Selene sat on a leather couch that smelled like gun oil and waited. 2 hours became 3. 3 became 4. Dawn started bleeding through the reinforced windows before she heard footsteps on the stairs. Dario entered looking worse than when he'd left, fresh bruises darkening his jaw, his knuckles split and bleeding, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "You look like hell," Selene said. "Good morning to you, too." He headed straight for the kitchen and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, not bothering with a glass. "We need to leave the city." What? Someone inside my organization leaked tonight's meeting. That means we're compromised. He took a long pull from the bottle. I'm taking you somewhere safe until I can clean house. Where? Private island? Mediterranean, off the grid. He finally looked at her, his amber eyes bloodshot. We leave in 6 hours. Selene stood. I need to see my father first. No. Dario, whoever leaked that meeting knows about your father, knows about the facility in Connecticut, knows you visit every week. He set down the bottle with deliberate precision. Going there now puts him directly in the crosshairs. Then bring him with us. He's too fragile to transport. The move could kill him. Dario's expression softened fractionally. I've already tripled security at the facility. He's safer there than anywhere else right now. The logic was sound, but that didn't stop the panic clawing at Selene's chest. How long will we be gone? As long as it takes to root out the traitor. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. They stared at each other across the small kitchen. Selene's hands trembled with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. Dario looked like he might collapse if he stopped moving for more than 30 seconds. You're bleeding, she said quietly. I know. Let me clean it. I'm fine. You're dripping blood on the floor. She moved toward him before he could protest. Sit down. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then something in his expression cracked, and he lowered himself into a kitchen chair with a wince that told her the injuries went deeper than what she could see. Selene found a first aid kit under the sink and pulled out antiseptic, gauze, medical tape. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, years of medical training taking over where emotion threatened to paralyze her. This is going to sting, she warned. I've had worse. She pressed antiseptic-soaked gauze against the cut above his eyebrow. Dario hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. Up close, she could see details she'd missed before. The faint scar along his jawline, the way his pupils dilated when she touched him, the rapid pulse visible in his throat. Who do you think leaked the meeting? She asked. Could be anyone. I've made a lot of enemies. Your enemies wouldn't have access to internal information. His eyes flicked up to meet hers. You're smarter than you let on. I'm a researcher. Pattern recognition is kind of my thing. She applied butterfly bandages to the cut with steady fingers. So who inside your organization would want you dead? Take your pick. I've got at least a dozen people who'd benefit from my death. But only one who'd risk it tonight. Dario caught her wrist, stopping her ministrations. This isn't your world, Selene. Don't try to make it make sense. Everything makes sense if you look at it the right way. Not this. Not the kind of betrayal that comes from people you've known for 20 years. His grip tightened fractionally. The kind who eat at your table and plan your murder between courses. Selene held his gaze. Then we figure out which one it is. We? You think I'm going to sit on some island while you handle this alone? That's exactly what I think. He released her wrist and stood, putting distance between them. Your job is to stay alive and look pretty in photographs, remember? That was before someone tried to kill us both. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed. She slammed the first aid kit closed harder than necessary. I watched you jump off a building tonight, Dario. I pulled you into that helicopter myself. You don't get to pretend we're still strangers playing house. We are strangers. Strangers don't hold hands in the dark. The words hung between them like an accusation. Dario's jaw worked, his hands curling into fists at his sides. That was survival instinct, nothing more. Liar. Excuse me? Selene stepped closer, her exhaustion burning away into something sharper. You keep trying to push me away, keep insisting this marriage means nothing, but your actions tell a different story. You made sure my father got the best care. You let me visit him even when it complicated your security. You brought me to that warehouse tonight instead of leaving me ignorant and safe. I was proving a point. No, you were letting me in. She was close enough now to see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. And it terrifies you. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Her voice dropped. What was her name? The woman in the photograph. Dario's expression went completely blank. Get some sleep. We leave at noon. Dario, that's an order, Mrs. Falcone. He walked out before she could respond, leaving her alone in a safe house kitchen with bloody gauze and the growing certainty that she'd married a man who was drowning in ghosts, he refused to name. Mats. The private jet took off from Teterboro Airport at exactly noon. Selene had never been on a private plane before. The leather seats, the polished wood, the flight attendant who appeared whenever needed and disappeared just as quickly. It felt like stepping into a different universe, one where money solved every problem except the ones that actually mattered. Dario sat across from her, laptop open, typing with brutal efficiency. He'd showered and changed into fresh clothes, but the bruises on his jaw had darkened to deep purple, and he moved like someone whose ribs hurt with every breath. "How long is the flight?" Selene asked. 9 hours. He didn't look up from his screen. "There's a bedroom in the back if you want to sleep." "I'm not tired." "Then read. Watch a movie. Just don't bother me while I'm working." So much for the fragile connection they'd built in the helicopter. Whatever moment they'd shared had clearly evaporated in the harsh light of day, replaced by Dario's default setting of cold indifference. Selene pulled out her phone and tried to text her father's nurse, but there was no signal. Of course not. They were probably flying over the Atlantic by now, cut off from everything familiar. She must have dozed off at some point because when she woke, the sun had shifted position and Dario was staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "What?" She rubbed sleep from her eyes. "You talk in your sleep." Heat flooded her face. "What did I say?" "Doesn't matter." He closed his laptop. "We'll be landing in 2 hours. When we get to the island, there are rules." "Of course there are. Don't leave the estate grounds without security. Don't use any electronic devices that aren't pre-approved. Don't tell anyone where we are." His amber eyes pinned her in place. "And don't trust anyone except Marco and me." "That's a short list. It's the only list that matters." The island appeared through the clouds like something out of a dream. White stone villas climbing hillsides covered in olive groves and cypress trees, sapphire water stretching endlessly in all directions. A private dock jutted into the sea, where a luxury yacht sat anchored like a toy. The plane landed on a private airstrip carved into the island's northern coast. A Land Rover waited on the tarmac, driven by a woman with sharp eyes and a shoulder holster visible beneath her linen jacket. "This is Lucia," Dario said as they climbed into the vehicle. "She runs security for the estate." Lucia nodded once at Selene. "Mrs. Falcone." "Just Selene is fine." "Mrs. Falcone," Lucia repeated, her tone making it clear the informality wasn't an option. The estate sat on the island's highest point, surrounded by gardens that looked ancient and carefully maintained. The main villa was all white stone and terracotta, with arched doorways and windows that overlooked the Mediterranean like it was a personal possession. Inside, the villa was surprisingly sparse. No excessive decoration, no obvious displays of wealth, just clean lines, comfortable furniture, and the kind of quiet that came from true isolation. "Your room," Dario said, opening a door that led to a suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. "Mine's next door." "Next door?" The words came out sharper than intended. "Not separate wings this time?" "The estate is smaller than the penthouse, and I need you close in case something happens." "You mean you don't trust me not to wander?" His expression didn't shift. "Take it however you want." That night, Selene discovered what true isolation felt like. No city lights, no traffic sounds, just the whisper of wind through olive trees and the distant crash of waves against cliffs. She stood on her balcony, wrapped in a silk robe that had been left in the closet, and wondered how her life had become so completely unrecognizable. A sound from the adjacent balcony drew her attention. Dario stood there, wearing only pajama pants, his torso covered in bruises she hadn't seen before. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, staring out at the dark water like he was searching for something he'd never find. "Can't sleep?" Selene called softly. He turned, surprised to see her. "Old habit. I don't sleep well." "Because of nightmares?" "Because sleep is when people get killed." The casual brutality of the statement hung in the salt air between them. "Even here?" Selene gestured at the peaceful darkness. "On your own private island?" "Especially here." Dario took a long sip of his drink. "Isolation makes you vulnerable if the wrong people find you." "Then why bring me here?" "Because the alternatives were worse." They stood in silence, separated by 20 feet of Mediterranean night and a lifetime of differences neither of them knew how to bridge. "She was my mother," Dario said suddenly. "The woman in the photograph." Celine's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak, afraid that any response would shut him down. She raised me alone in Hell's Kitchen, worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, died when I was 12 because we couldn't afford the treatment that would have saved her life. His knuckles went white around the glass. That's when I learned what powerlessness actually costs. I'm sorry. Don't be. It made me what I am. He drained the whiskey. Everything I've built, every choice I've made comes from watching her suffocate on a hospital bed while rich people walked past her room without a second thought. Is that why you helped my father? Because you saw yourself in me? Dario's laugh was bitter. I helped your father because I saw her, and I couldn't let it happen again, even if it meant dragging someone clean into my world. The admission hit like a physical blow. All this time, Selene had thought she was a transaction, a convenient asset. But Dario had chosen her because she reminded him of the one person he'd loved and lost. That's not fair, she said quietly. Nothing about this is fair. You used me as a stand-in for your trauma. Yes. The honesty was worse than a lie would have been. Selene gripped the balcony railing hard enough to hurt. I'm not your mother, Dario. I know. And I'm not some charity case you get to save to make yourself feel better about failing to save her. I know that too. He set down his glass with deliberate precision. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Then maybe you should figure out which one matters more. She went back inside before he could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay in bed listening to Dario pace on his balcony, his footsteps steady and relentless, like a man walking circles around wounds that would never heal. Morning arrived with brutal Mediterranean sunshine and the smell of coffee drifting through the villa. Selene found Dario in the kitchen, laptop open again, looking like he hadn't slept at all. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his jaw was tight with the kind of tension that came from problems without easy solutions. Coffee? He offered without looking up. Please. He poured her a cup with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. No conversation, no acknowledgement of the previous night's confession, just coffee and silence, and the uncomfortable awareness that they were trapped on an island together with nowhere to hide. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. We have a problem. Dario's entire demeanor shifted. What kind? Constantine's people are asking questions, quietly but persistently. They want to know where you went. Tell them I'm handling internal business. I did. They're not satisfied. Marco glanced at Selene, then back to Dario. They're suggesting that your sudden disappearance means you're weak, that the ambush rattled you. Dario's laugh was cold. Let them think what they want. Boss, if they think you're weak, they'll move against you. We need to show strength. By doing what? Walking back into New York with a target on my back? By making an example of whoever leaked that meeting. Marco's voice was hard. Find them. Eliminate them. Send a message. Selene's stomach turned. This was the reality of Dario's world, a place where human lives were chess pieces to be sacrificed for strategic advantage. I'm working on it, Dario said. Work faster. Marco's eyes flicked to Selene again. And maybe consider whether bringing your wife to the island was a smart strategic move or a vulnerability. Watch yourself, Dario said quietly, but the warning in his voice was unmistakable. Marco raised his hands, just saying what everyone's thinking. After he left, silence filled the kitchen like poison gas. He's right, Selene said. About what? I'm a liability. She set down her coffee cup. I don't belong in this world, and everyone knows it. You belong where I say you belong. That's not how reality works. Dario slammed his laptop shut. Reality is whatever I make it. That's how power actually functions. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man running scared. The words landed like a slap. Dario stood so fast his chair scraped against tile. You want to see what scared looks like? His voice was dangerously soft. Scared is knowing that someone in my inner circle, someone I've trusted for years, wants me dead. Scared is realizing that every person I've ever cared about becomes a target the moment I let them get close. Scared is bringing my wife to a private island because it's the only place I can guarantee she won't get killed in the crossfire. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you dragged me into this marriage. Maybe I should have. He moved closer, his amber eyes burning. But I didn't, and now we're both stuck in the consequences. They stood inches apart, breathing hard, the air between them crackling with anger and something more dangerous neither of them wanted to name. "What do you want from me?" Selene demanded. "You won't let me help. You won't let me leave. You won't even let me understand what the hell is happening. So what am I supposed to do? Just exist in limbo while you fight invisible wars?" "Yes. That's not good enough. It's all I can offer." "Liar." She shoved his chest with both hands. "You could offer honesty. You could offer partnership. You could stop treating me like some fragile thing that'll shatter if you actually let me see the real you." "You don't want to see the real me." "Stop deciding what I want." Dario grabbed her wrists, his grip tight. "You think you're ready for the truth? Fine. The real me is the person who's killed 17 people with his bare hands. The real me launders money for cartels and covers up murders for politicians. The real me built an empire by destroying anyone who stood in the way, and I'd do it again without hesitation." "I know all that. All. No, you know the concept. You don't know the details." His voice dropped to something raw. "You don't know what it's like to watch someone beg for their life and pull the trigger anyway. You don't know the sound a body makes when it hits the ground. You don't know how blood smells when it pools on concrete in the summer heat." Selene held his gaze. "You're trying to scare me." "I'm trying to make you understand what you married." "I married a man who's terrified of being vulnerable. A man who uses violence and power to avoid feeling anything real. A man who'd rather push people away than risk actually caring about them." Dario released her wrists like she'd burned him. "You don't know anything. I know you play piano when you think no one's listening. I know you made sure my father got better care than he could ever afford. I know you held my hand in a helicopter even though it contradicted every wall you've built." She stepped closer. "I know you're not the monster you pretend to be." "Yes, I am." "No. Monsters don't have nightmares. Monsters don't pace at night because they can't silence their conscience. Monsters don't—" He kissed her, rough and desperate and nothing like tenderness. His hands cradled her face with a gentleness that contradicted the brutality of his mouth against hers. Selene froze for half a second before her body took over, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed that this was a terrible idea. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dario's expression was devastated. "We can't do this," he said. "Why not?" "Because the moment I care about you, really care about you, you become the easiest way to destroy me." His thumb brushed against her cheek. "And I have too many enemies for that to end well." "Maybe I don't care about the ending." "You should." But he didn't step away, didn't release her, just stood there with his forehead pressed against hers, his breathing ragged, his entire body trembling with the effort of not crossing a line they both knew would change everything. Selene's phone buzzed in her pocket. The sound shattered the moment like glass against concrete. She pulled it out with shaking hands, a text from an unknown number. "Your father stopped breathing 20 minutes ago. They revived him, but it was close. Thought you should know. Dr. Chen." The world tilted sideways, Selene's knees buckled, and Dario caught her before she hit the floor. "What happened?" "My father." She shoved the phone at him, unable to speak past the panic clawing at her throat. Dario read the message, his expression darkening. He immediately pulled out his own phone and dialed. "Marco, get the jet ready. We're leaving in 20 minutes. A pause. "I don't care. Make it happen." He hung up and turned to Selene. "Get dressed. We're going back to New York." "You said it was too dangerous." "It is. But your father almost died and you need to see him." His jaw was tight. "Some things matter more than strategy." 30 minutes later, they were back on the private jet, racing across the Atlantic toward a city that wanted them both dead. Selene sat rigid in her seat, her mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios. Dario sat across from her, making phone calls in rapid Italian, his voice hard and commanding. When he finally hung up, he reached across the space between them and took her hand. "He's stable. The facility confirmed it 15 minutes ago." Relief flooded through her so intensely it hurt. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Going back puts us both at risk." "I don't care." "You should." His grip tightened. But I understand why you don't. They landed at Teterboro in the middle of a rainstorm that turned the tarmac into a mirror. Two SUVs waited, engines running, surrounded by more security than Selene had ever seen. Marco looked grim as they climbed into the first vehicle. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Another one?" Dario's voice was flat. "Constantine knows you're back. His people have eyes on the facility in Connecticut." Celine's blood went cold. "My father, Iker, is fine for now, but Constantine's making a move. He thinks your attachment to him is a weakness he can exploit." "Then we move him," Dario said immediately. "Different facility, different state, new identity." "We don't have time. Constantine's people are already in position." The SUV accelerated through rain-soaked streets. Celine's heart hammered against her ribs. This was her fault. By marrying Dario, by becoming part of his world, she'd painted a target on her father's back. "What do we do?" she asked. Dario's expression was carved from stone. "We show Constantine what happens when he threatens what's mine." The facility in Connecticut looked peaceful when they arrived 2 hours later. Too peaceful. Selena's instincts screamed danger even before she saw the black sedans parked in the visitor's lot. "Stay in the car," Dario ordered. "Like hell." "Selene, he's my father. I'm not hiding while—" Gunfire shattered the night. The SUV's windows exploded inward. Marco yanked Selene down as bullets tore through metal. Dario returned fire through the broken window, his face utterly calm, like violence was just another Tuesday. "Get her out of here," he shouted at Marco. "Not without you," Selene screamed. More gunfire. The SUV's tires exploded, the vehicle lurching sideways. Through the chaos, Selene saw men in tactical gear surrounding them, their faces hidden behind masks. This was it. The moment Dario had warned her about. The moment his world swallowed them both whole. Dario kicked open his door and rolled into the rain, firing as he moved. Marco shoved Selene toward the other side of the vehicle, providing cover while she scrambled across broken glass and spent shell casings. "The facility!" she shouted. "We have to get to my father. We have to survive the next 60 seconds first." A grenade rolled under the SUV. Marco saw it first. His eyes went wide. He grabbed Selene and threw her behind a concrete barrier just as the world exploded into fire and noise and shrapnel that tore through the air like metal rain. When the smoke cleared, the SUV was a burning wreck. Marco lay motionless 3 feet away, blood pooling beneath him. Selene's ears rang so loud she couldn't hear her own screaming. Then Dario was there, his face covered in ash and blood, pulling her to her feet. "Can you run?" She nodded, unable to form words. "Then run." They sprinted toward the facility through rain and gunfire. Selene's expensive dress was torn, her feet bare after losing her heels in the explosion. Bullets chased them across the parking lot, and she wondered distantly if this was how she died. Running through a Connecticut rainstorm beside a man she'd married out of desperation and somehow started to love. They crashed through the facility's front entrance. Staff screamed and scattered. Dario moved like a guided missile, navigating hallways with the precision of someone who'd memorized the blueprints. Her father's room was on the 3rd floor. They took the stairs 3 at a time. Dario kicked open the door to her father's room, gun raised, ready for anything. The room was empty. Not empty of people. Empty of everything. The bed stripped, the machines gone. No sign anyone had ever occupied the space. Selena's world stopped. "Where is he?" she whispered. Dario was already on his phone. "Marco, I need eyes on patient Michael Valls. Fuck, Marco's down." He switched channels. "Lucia, I need immediate location on patient Michael Vale, room 317, Clearwater Facility, Connecticut." A pause that felt like eternity. "He was transferred 4 hours ago," Lucia's voice crackled through the speaker. "Emergency relocation per your standing orders." Relief nearly brought Selene to her knees. "Where?" "Secure location. Only you and I have the address." Dario's expression was unreadable. "Send it encrypted. And Lucia, double the security. This was too close." He hung up and turned to Selene. "He's safe. I had contingency plans in place." "You moved my father without telling me?" "I moved him because I knew this would happen." His voice was hard. "And I was right." The anger that had been building beneath Selene's terror finally exploded. You don't get to make decisions about my family without consulting me. I do when those decisions keep him breathing. He's my father, and you're my wife. The words echoed through the empty hospital room. Which means your safety and his safety are my responsibility, whether you like it or not. They stood there, both shaking, both covered in blood and ash, the weight of everything that had just happened crushing down like a physical force. Marco's dead, Selene said quietly. Dario's jaw tightened. I know. He died protecting me. That was his job. His job. The words tasted like bile. He was a person, Dario. A human being with a life, and I know! The roar came from somewhere deep and broken. I know exactly who he was. I've known him for 15 years. He was at my wedding, this wedding. He was supposed to retire next year and move to Florida. Dario's hands shook. And now he's dead because Constantine decided to escalate, and I wasn't fast enough to stop it. The confession broke something inside Selene. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him before she could second-guess the impulse. Dario went rigid. For a moment she thought he'd push her away. Then his arms came around her, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world coming apart at the seams. They stood like that for a long time, two people bound by a paper contract that had somehow become real in the worst possible way, while sirens wailed in the distance and the rain hammered against windows that no longer felt like protection. We can't go back to the island, Dario said finally. Why not? Because Constantine knows about it now, knows we ran there, which means it's compromised. He released her, his expression settling back into the cold mask. We need to disappear completely. Somewhere even my own people can't find us. Where? I have a place. Remote. Off-grid. The kind of location I've kept secret for exactly this scenario. Another safe house? More like a fortress. His amber eyes held hers. But Selene, if we go there, we go alone. No staff, no security team, just you and me against whatever comes next. The implication hung heavy between them. Isolation, proximity. No buffer between them and whatever this thing was that kept trying to ignite every time they got too close. How long? She asked. Until I root out the traitor and eliminate Constantine's threat. Could be days. Could be weeks. And my father will remain hidden and protected, but you won't be able to contact him. Won't be able to know where he is. Dario's voice softened fractionally. I need you to trust me with his life. Trust. Such a small word for such an impossible ask. But when Selene looked at Dario, really looked at him, past the blood and the violence and the walls he'd built, she saw the truth he kept trying to hide. He was terrified. Not of Constantine or the traitor or even death itself. He was terrified of failing to protect the people he'd let himself care about. Okay, she said. Okay? I trust you. Something in Dario's expression cracked open. He reached out and brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away ash she hadn't realized was there. That might be the most dangerous decision you've ever made, he said softly. Probably. They left through the facility's service entrance as police, wolves, and ambulances flooded the front. The second SUV was waiting in an alley 3 blocks away, driven by one of Lucia's people. They climbed inside without speaking, both too exhausted and wrecked to form words. Somewhere during the 2-hour drive to wherever they were going, Selene fell asleep with her head against Dario's shoulder. She woke to find his arm around her, his cheek resting against her hair, his breathing finally even. And for the first time since this nightmare marriage began, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, they were both falling into something neither of them knew how to survive. The fortress turned out to be a hunting cabin buried in the Adirondacks, 3 hours north of anywhere that mattered. No cell service, no internet, no neighbors for 20 miles in any direction, just dense forest, a lake that looked black in the fading light, and a structure built from stone and timber that seemed designed to withstand sieges. Dario killed the engine and sat motionless for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. Blood from the cut on his temple had dried into a dark streak down his face. His shirt was torn, exposing bruises that had darkened to deep purple. He looked like he'd been through a war. He had been. Stay here, he said, pulling a gun from beneath his seat. Let me clear the perimeter. Selene watched him move through the twilight with lethal precision, checking sight lines, testing locks, scanning the tree line for threats that probably weren't there. When he finally returned and opened her door, his expression was carefully blank. It's secure. The cabin's interior was Spartan. One main room with a fireplace, a kitchenette that looked barely functional, a bathroom with a shower stall, and nothing else. A loft accessible by ladder held a single bed covered in military-grade blankets. One bed. Dario saw her looking and his jaw tightened. I'll take the couch. Don't be ridiculous, you're injured. So are you. She glanced down at herself properly for the first time since the explosion. Her dress was shredded, exposing cuts along her arms and legs she hadn't felt in the chaos. Dried blood crusted her palms from crawling across broken glass. Her feet were filthy and bleeding from running barefoot across pavement. Jesus, she whispered. Sit down. Dario's voice was clinical. I need to check you for serious injuries. He pulled a first aid kit from a storage locker that looked like it contained enough supplies to survive an apocalypse. His hands moved over her with professional detachment, checking her pupils, palpating her ribs, examining the cuts for embedded glass. Nothing life-threatening, he said finally. But you're going to hurt like hell tomorrow. I hurt like hell now. It'll get worse. He started cleaning the cuts with antiseptic that burned like liquid fire. The adrenaline still masking most of the pain. Selene hissed through her teeth but didn't pull away. Where did you learn field medicine? The same place I learned everything else, the streets. His fingers were surprisingly gentle despite the brutal efficiency. When you grow up without money for doctors, you learn to handle your own injuries. Or you die. Or you die, he agreed. They worked in silence after that. Dario cleaned and bandaged her wounds while Selene tried not to think about Marco's body lying in a Connecticut parking lot, or her father hidden somewhere she couldn't reach, or the fact that she was now trapped in a cabin in the middle of nowhere with a man she'd kissed and immediately regretted and desperately wanted to kiss again. When he finished, Dario stood and peeled off his ruined shirt. The bruises covered his torso like a topographical map of violence. Some were fresh from tonight's attack. Others looked days old, layered reminders that his life was a continuous cycle of damage. Your turn, Selene said. I'm fine. You have a piece of shrapnel in your shoulder. He twisted to look and swore in Italian. A shard of metal the size of a fingernail protruded from his left shoulder blade, blood seeping around it in a slow, steady flow. I didn't even feel it, he muttered. Adrenaline, Selene echoed his earlier words, masking the pain. She made him sit while she sterilized tweezers and examined the wound. The shrapnel had embedded deep, close to bone. Removing it was going to hurt. This might... just do it. She pulled. Dario's entire body went rigid, his breath hissing through clenched teeth, but he didn't make a sound. The metal came free with a wet, sucking noise that made Selene's stomach turn. Blood flowed freely now, hot against her fingers. Press here, she instructed, guiding his hand to hold gauze against the wound while she prepared sutures. This is going to need stitches. You know how to suture? I spent 2 years in pre-med before switching to research. She threaded the needle with hands steadier than she felt. Hold still. The process was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with attraction. Her fingers against his skin, his breath on her neck as she leaned close. The trust required to let someone pierce your flesh repeatedly while you sat motionless and bleeding. When she finished, Dario's shoulder was a neat line of black thread crossing the wound. Not pretty, but functional. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me. It's going to scar. Everything scars. He rolled his shoulder experimentally, wincing. At least this one has a story worth telling. Selene cleaned blood from her hands and tried not to think about what he meant by that. I should shower. Water heater's temperamental. You'll have about 5 minutes of hot water, then it's Arctic. The shower was indeed temperamental, fluctuating between scalding and freezing with no middle ground. Selene stood under the spray and watched blood and ash and the last remnants of her old life swirl down the drain. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel that smelled like cedar and gunpowder, she found Dario had started a fire in the stone fireplace. He'd changed into jeans and a black thermal shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His wet hair was slicked back from his face, and without the armor of expensive suits, he looked younger, more human, more dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence. "There's clothes in the loft," he said without turning from the fire. "Military surplus, but clean." She climbed the ladder and found a storage trunk filled with practical clothing in various sizes. She pulled on thermal leggings and an oversized wool sweater that hung past her thighs. When she came back down, Dario had opened a bottle of whiskey and was staring into the flames like they held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. "Want some?" He held up the bottle. "Yes." He poured 2 glasses and handed her one. They sat on opposite ends of the worn leather couch, the fire casting dancing shadows across walls decorated with nothing but old hunting maps and the heads of animals that had died decades ago. "Marco had a daughter," Dario said suddenly. "Isabella. She's 19. Pre-law at Columbia." Selene's throat tightened. "Did he have a wife?" "Divorced 5 years ago. Amicable split." Dario took a long drink. "I'll make sure Isabella's taken care of. Trust fund, tuition, whatever she needs." "That doesn't bring him back." "No, it doesn't." His knuckles went white around the glass. He knew the risks. We all do. But knowing doesn't make it easier when someone you've known for 15 years dies because you weren't fast enough. "It's not your fault." "Yes, it is." He drained the whiskey and poured another. "I brought you into this world. I made you a target. Marco died protecting you because I put you in danger in the first place. I chose this. You chose survival. That's not the same thing as consent." Selene set down her glass. "Stop trying to take responsibility for every bad thing that happens. You're not that powerful." "In my world, I am. Your world is falling apart, Dario. Constantine's moving against you. Someone in your organization is a traitor. Your wife, me, is a liability you can't eliminate and won't protect properly because you're too busy punishing yourself for crimes you think you committed against people you barely know." "I know you." "No, you don't." She stood, exhaustion and grief and anger boiling over into something she couldn't control. "You know the version of me that reminds you of your dead mother. You know the transaction. You don't know me." "Then tell me." Dario stood too, moving closer. "Tell me who you are beyond the medical researcher with student loans and a sick father." "I'm the girl who spent 6 months thinking she was dying from an autoimmune disease that turned out to be misdiagnosed." The words came out hard and fast. "I'm the person who watched her father sacrifice everything to pay for treatments I didn't even need. I'm someone who graduated top of her class and still couldn't find a job that paid enough to cover the debt we both drowned in." Selene, I'm angry, Dario, all the time. Angry at a system that bankrupts people for being sick. Angry at myself for not being stronger. Angry at my father for being too proud to ask for help. She was close enough now to see the rapid pulse in his throat. "And I'm angry at you for making me feel things I have no business feeling for a man who bought me like property." "What things?" The question hung between them like a lit fuse. Selene knew she should step back, should retreat to the loft and put physical distance between them and this conversation. Should protect whatever remained of her dignity. Instead, she closed the gap and kissed him. This time it wasn't desperate or rough. This time it was deliberate. A choice made with full knowledge of the consequences. Her hands fisted in his thermal shirt while his arms came around her waist, pulling her against him like he'd been waiting for permission he didn't think he deserved. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dario's forehead rested against hers. "This is a mistake," he whispered. "I know. We should stop." Probably. But neither of them moved. They stood there in firelight and shadows, the weight of everything they'd survived pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. "I saw you weeks before the contract," Dario admitted. "At the hospital. You were sitting in the cafeteria at 3 in the morning, still wearing your lab coat, eating terrible vending machine food and reading a journal article about something I didn't understand." Selene's breath caught. "That was months ago. I know. I'd gone there to visit one of my people who'd been shot. Saw you through the cafeteria window and thought..." He stopped, his jaw working. "I thought you looked like someone who still believed the world could be fixed if you just worked hard enough." "Why didn't you approach me then?" "Because I knew what I was. Knew what being near me would cost you." His hands tightened on her waist. "But when your father's debts crossed my desk, I saw an opportunity to have something clean in my life. something untouched by the corruption that infects everything else. I'm not clean, Dario. I'm just as broken as you are. You're not. I married you for money. That's pretty broken. You married me to save your father. That's love, not corruption. The distinction shouldn't have mattered, but somehow it did. Selene's hands moved from his chest to his face, her thumbs brushing across the sharp line of his jaw. What happens now? She asked. I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have. Dario's eyes searched hers. Everything in my life is calculated, strategic, but this, I don't know how to calculate. Then stop trying. She kissed him again, and this time when his hands moved beneath her sweater, she didn't stop him. They stumbled toward the loft ladder, mouths never separating, years of loneliness and fear and denial burning away in the heat between them. Somewhere in the tangle of limbs and desperate touches, the paper marriage became real. Selene woke to gray morning light filtering through small windows, and Dario's arm draped across her waist. He was still asleep, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. The hard lines had softened, the constant tension had released. He looked almost vulnerable. She carefully extracted herself and climbed down the ladder, her body aching in new ways that had nothing to do with yesterday's violence. The fire had burned down to embers. The whiskey bottle stood empty on the floor. Outside, snow had started to fall, blanketing the forest in silence. This was a mistake. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. Getting emotionally involved with Dario Falcone was signing her own death warrant. His world consumed everything it touched. Love would just make her an easier target. But when she heard him moving in the loft above her, felt his eyes on her back, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. "Morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning." He climbed down wearing only the jeans from last night, his torso a canvas of bruises and fresh bandages. The sutures in his shoulder looked angry in the gray light, but the bleeding had stopped. "How do you feel?" Selene asked. "Like I got blown up and then had the best night of my life." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "You?" "Same." They stared at each other for a moment, both clearly unsure how to navigate this new territory. Then Dario's phone buzzed from where he'd left it on the kitchen counter. His expression shifted instantly back to the cold mask. He checked the screen and swore. "What?" "Lucia. She found something." He pulled up an encrypted message and his face went completely blank. "No." "What is it?" "The traitor." His voice was hollow. "She identified the traitor." Selene moved closer. "Who?" Dario turned the phone so she could see the screen. A photograph of a man in an expensive suit, silver hair perfectly styled, European features sharp and aristocratic. "Constantine." "I don't understand," Selene said. "Constantine's your enemy, not Constantine." Dario's finger slid to another photograph beneath the first. His source. The person feeding him information about my movements, my security, my plans. The second photograph showed a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Selene recognized her immediately. Dr. Sarah Chen, her father's primary physician at the Connecticut facility. The world tilted sideways. "That's impossible." Lucia tracked the leak through 6 different burner phones and 2 encrypted servers. "Dr. Chen has been feeding Constantine information about your father's condition, your visits, your schedule." Dario's voice was flat, emotionless, but his hand shook. "She's been on his payroll for 3 years. She was his doctor before my father even got sick." "I know." The implication hit like a physical blow. "You think she made him sick? Caused the stroke? I think nothing in my world happens by accident." Dario's eyes were empty of everything except cold calculation. "Your father's collapse, the timing of his debts coming due, Dr. Chen being the attending physician, it's too convenient." Selene's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the couch, her mind racing through every interaction she'd had with Dr. Chen. The sympathetic smiles, the gentle updates, the way she'd always seemed to know exactly when Selene would visit. "She tried to kill him last night," Selene whispered. "The text about him stopping breathing, that was her." "Probably. A test to see if we'd break cover and come back to the city." Dario's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. Constantine wanted me exposed and vulnerable. Dr. Chen gave him the exact tool he needed. My father. Yes. Rage flooded through Selene so intensely she thought she might vomit. Where is she? In custody. Lucia grabbed her 2 hours ago. I want to see her. No. Dario. I said no. His voice was hard. You don't need to see what happens to traitors in my world. She tried to kill my father, and she'll pay for it, but you're not watching. He moved closer, his expression almost gentle. You're still clean, Selene. I won't let you cross that line. I crossed that line the moment I married you. No, you survived. There's a difference between surviving my world and becoming part of it. His hands framed her face. Let me handle this. I want her to suffer. She will. I want her to know why. She does. Dario's thumbs brushed away tears Selene hadn't realized were falling. She knew the moment Lucia put a gun to her head exactly what she'd done and who it cost. The casual mention of violence should have horrified her. Instead, Selene felt something cold and satisfied settle into her chest. Dr. Chen deserved whatever was coming. Deserved it and more. What about Constantine? She asked. He's next. How? I'm going to destroy everything he's built. His organization, his alliances, his reputation. Dario's voice was ice. And then I'm going to kill him myself. When? Soon as I confirm your father is secure and we've eliminated any remaining threats. He pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. But first, I need to make sure you're protected. Because the moment I move against Constantine, this gets messier than anything we've survived so far. Selene pulled back to look at him. I'm not running. I'm not asking you to run. I'm asking you to stay here while I finish this. Absolutely not. Selene, you don't get to lock me away for my own protection. Not after last night, not after... She gestured helplessly at the loft. We're in this together now. That's exactly why I need you safe. Safe is an illusion in your world. You said so yourself. She grabbed his hands. The only way we survive this is together. Dario stared at her for a long moment, something like fear flickering across his face. If something happens to you because I let you come with me, then it's my choice, my risk. Selene's voice steadied. You don't carry this alone anymore. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her before she disappeared. When they finally broke apart, his expression had shifted into something determined and terrifying. Okay, he said, together. Lucia called 3 hours later with an update that changed everything. Selene watched Dario's face transform as he listened, his knuckles going white around the phone. When he finally hung up, he looked like he'd been shot. What happened? She asked. Your father. His voice was barely audible. He's gone. The world stopped. What do you mean gone? The safe house where I moved him, someone hid it an hour ago. Constantine's people. They took him. Selene couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process the words coming out of Dario's mouth. You said he was secure. You said, I know what I said. Dario's hands shook. I was wrong. Constantine had another source, someone beyond Dr. Chen, someone who knew about my contingency locations. Then find them. I'm trying. The roar echoed through the cabin. You think I'm not trying? Your father is the only leverage Constantine has against me. He's not going to kill him. He's going to use him to draw me out. Then we go, right now. That's exactly what Constantine wants. The moment I show my face, he'll have kill teams converging from every direction. I don't care. Well, I do. Dario grabbed her shoulders. If I walk into Constantine's trap, we both die. Your father dies. And Constantine wins everything. Tears streamed down Selene's face. Then what do? We think. We plan. His voice was urgent. Constantine made one mistake. He took your father alive, which means he needs him for leverage. That buys us time. How much time? 48 hours. Maybe less. Dario released her and started pacing. He'll reach out with demands, terms for a meeting, and when he does, we'll be ready. Ready how? I have resources Constantine doesn't know about,
People who owe me favors big enough to risk their lives. He was already on his phone, typing rapidly. But we need to move fast. Get dressed. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Where are we going?
New York. Back into the fire. His eyes met hers. And Selene, when this is over, one of two things happens. Either Constantine dies, or I do. There's no middle ground anymore. She understood what he wasn't saying. This was the endgame, the final confrontation that would determine whether they survived or became another cautionary tale about people who tried to love in a world built on violence. Then we make sure it's him, she said. Dario's expression softened fractionally. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But I'm keeping you anyway. Good. They loaded into the SUV 20 minutes later, the cabin behind them already feeling like a memory from a different life. Snow continued to fall across the Adirondacks, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath it. Halfway back to New York, Dario's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. What do you want, Constantine? The voice that came through was smooth, cultured, utterly devoid of empathy. Dario, so good of you to pick up. Cut the shit. You have something that belongs to me. Oh, I have several things that belong to you. A father-in-law, for instance. Lovely man. We've been having the most interesting conversations about his daughter. Selene's hands clenched into fists. Dario's face was carved from stone. State your terms, Dario said. Simple. You. In exchange for Michael Vale. Constantine's pleasure was audible. Tomorrow night. The Red Hook warehouse where this all began. Come alone, unarmed, and your wife's father walks free. And if I refuse, then I mail you pieces of him until you change your mind. The line went dead. Dario drove in silence for 5 full minutes before he pulled over to the shoulder and slammed his fists against the steering wheel hard enough to crack the leather. He's going to kill me the moment I walk through that door, he said. I know. And probably kill your father anyway. I know that too. Dario turned to look at her, his amber eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. I can't beat him, Selene. Not in a straight fight. Not on his territory with his terms. Then we don't fight straight. What? You said I'm clean, untouched by your world, someone the FBI can't connect to your operations. Selene's mind raced, pieces of a plan clicking together. Constantine doesn't know me, doesn't see me as a threat. Absolutely not. Whatever you're thinking, he wants you alone and unarmed. Fine. Give him that. She grabbed his hand. But I'm the variable he won't see coming. Dario stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You want to walk into a death trap with me. I want to save my father. And you. Selene's voice was steady. You taught me to shoot last month, remember? At the range. You said I was a natural. Shooting targets is different from shooting people. I shot at people in Connecticut. I didn't freeze. That was survival instinct. This is premeditated. So teach me. She met his eyes. We have 24 hours. Teach me how to survive your world. For a long moment, Dario didn't speak. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not hope exactly, something harder, something that looked like the terrible calculation of a man who'd run out of better options. Okay, he said finally, but if this goes wrong, if you get hurt, then we go down together. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be true. Dario pulled her across the center console and kissed her like the world was ending. Because maybe it was. Maybe tomorrow night they'd both die in a warehouse in Red Hook, while Constantine laughed and her father bled out in some basement she'd never find. Or maybe, just maybe, the girl who'd married a monster to save her father would discover she was capable of becoming a monster herself. Either way, there was no turning back now. They returned to New York through back channels Selene didn't know existed. Not the airports or highways, but a network of safe routes that moved through the city's underground like blood through hidden veins. By the time they reached a warehouse in Long Island City, dawn was breaking across the skyline in shades of bruised purple and gold. The warehouse belonged to someone Dario trusted, an arms dealer named Victor who owed him 3 lives and a small fortune. Inside, the space had been converted into something between a shooting range and a tactical training facility. Targets hung at various distances. Weapons lined the walls in neat rows. The air smelled like gun oil and concrete. 24 hours, Dario said, his voice hollow from exhaustion and fear he was trying to bury. That's all we have to turn you into someone who can walk into hell and walk back out. Selene stood in the center of the warehouse, her hands steady despite everything screaming inside her head. Then we better not waste time. He started with basics she already knew from their previous range sessions: stance, grip, sight alignment. But this time the instruction was different, harder, more brutal in its honesty. Shooting paper targets and shooting people are completely different, Dario said, placing a Glock 19 in her hands. Paper doesn't shoot back, doesn't beg, doesn't bleed. His amber eyes held hers. Can you pull the trigger knowing what comes after? To save my father? Yes. What about to save yourself? She didn't hesitate. Yes. What about to save me? The question hung between them like a test she hadn't studied for. Selene thought about Marco dying in a parking lot, thought about her father locked in some basement waiting for rescue that might never come, thought about Dario's hands on her skin last night, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only clean thing left in his corrupted world. Yes, she said again. Something flickered across Dario's face, approval mixed with something that looked like grief. Then let's make sure you don't have to. They trained for 6 hours straight. Dario pushed her through drill after drill, teaching her how to move through confined spaces, how to clear corners, how to reload under pressure. He made her practice drawing from concealment until her hands blistered, made her run tactical scenarios until her legs shook with exhaustion. Constantine will have at least a dozen men in that warehouse, Dario said during a brief water break. Professional killers, not street thugs. They'll be watching for threats, scanning for weapons. You need to look harmless until the exact moment you're not. How? Body language, posture, the way you hold yourself. He demonstrated, shifting from relaxed to lethal in the space between heartbeats. Practice until it's instinct, until you can switch without thinking. Selene tried. Failed. Tried again. By the 100th repetition, something clicked. She could feel the difference in her own muscles, the way tension gathered and released, the micro-adjustments in balance that changed her from victim to threat. Better, Dario said. Again. They broke for food around noon, takeout Chinese eaten standing up, while Lucia called with updates. No new leads on her father's location. Constantine's people had gone silent across all channels. The trap was set and waiting. We have one advantage, Lucia said through the speaker. Constantine thinks you're broken, desperate. He expects you to walk in there defeated. I am desperate, Dario said quietly. Then use it. Let him think he's won before you show him otherwise. After the call ended, Dario pulled Selene into a storage room converted into a makeshift armory. Kevlar vests hung on racks, radios, night vision gear, enough firepower to start a small war. Pick a vest, he said. She selected one that fit snugly beneath a leather jacket Dario provided. The weight was substantial, but not unbearable. He showed her where to conceal a backup weapon, a compact Sig Sauer P365 that fit into a holster at the small of her back. This is your insurance policy, he said, checking the magazine. If everything goes to hell, this is what keeps you breathing long enough to escape. I'm not leaving without you. You are if I tell you to. Dario, this isn't negotiable. His voice was hard. If the choice is between you dying with me or you surviving alone, you survive. Understand? Selene wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she hadn't crossed every line she'd ever drawn just to abandon him when it mattered most. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He was terrified. Not of dying. Dario had made peace with that possibility years ago. He was terrified of getting her killed. Okay, she lied. He knew she was lying. She could see it in the tight set of his jaw. But he didn't call her on it. Instead, he pulled her close and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to something resembling humanity. I love you, he said into her hair. The words hit like bullets. Selene had known, somewhere beneath the surface, she'd known, but hearing him actually say it made everything real in a way that terrified her. I love you too, she whispered back. Then promise me something. What? If this goes wrong, if I don't make it out, promise you'll run. You'll disappear. You'll build a life somewhere far away from all this. Dario. Promise me, Selene. She pulled back to look at him. His amber eyes were wet. She'd never seen him cry before, and the sight broke something inside her chest. "I promise," she said, knowing it was another lie. This time, he chose to believe her. By evening, Selene could field strip and reassemble the Glock in under 30 seconds, could hit center mass on a moving target from 20 yards, could transition between her primary and backup weapons without conscious thought. Her body ached from hours of training, her hands were raw, and exhaustion sat heavy in her bones. But when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. This wasn't the medical researcher who'd signed a contract marriage to save her father. This was someone harder, someone capable of violence she'd never imagined, someone who might actually survive tomorrow night. Dario found her in the makeshift bathroom, staring at her reflection like it belonged to a stranger. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "No, just realizing how much I've changed." "You haven't changed. You've just stopped pretending to be weaker than you are." He stepped behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Strength like yours doesn't appear overnight. It was always there. You just needed a reason to use it." "My father." "Your father. Yourself. Me." His reflection met hers in the mirror. "All of the above." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it mean something. "We should get some sleep," Dario said finally. "Tomorrow's going to be—" His phone buzzed. Unknown number again. He answered on speaker. "Constantine." "Change of plans, Dario." Constantine's voice was smooth as poison. "I've decided I don't trust you to come alone. So here's the new arrangement. You and your lovely wife both come to the warehouse. Together. Otherwise, Michael Vale loses a finger every hour until you comply." Selene's stomach dropped. "You son of a—" Tisk, tisk. Such language. Constantine's pleasure was audible. "You have 1 hour to arrive. Clock's ticking." The line went dead. Dario slammed his phone against the wall hard enough to shatter it. "Fuck!" "He knows," Selene said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Somehow he knows we were planning something." "Doesn't matter. We're out of time." Dario's hands shook with rage barely contained. "An hour isn't enough to plan an assault. Isn't enough to gather resources. He's forcing us to walk in unprepared." "Then we walk in unprepared." "Selene, what choice do we have?" She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "My father loses a finger in an hour, probably worse after that. We can either spend the next 60 minutes panicking, or we can move." Dario stared at her like he was seeing someone completely different. Then his expression hardened into something cold and lethal. "Okay, we move." He pulled out a backup phone and dialed. "Lucia, code black. Red Hook Warehouse, 1 hour. I need every asset you can mobilize positioned within a 3-block radius." "That's not enough time to—" "Make it enough. And Lucia, if we don't make it out, you know what to do. Boss, you know what to do." He hung up and turned to Selene. "Check your weapons. Double-check your vest. We leave in 5 minutes." The drive to Red Hook took 40 minutes through traffic that felt designed by a malicious universe to waste what little time they had. Dario drove with controlled aggression, weaving through gaps that shouldn't have existed, jumping lights, taking shortcuts through alleys barely wide enough for the SUV. With 10 minutes to spare, they pulled up 3 blocks from the warehouse. "This is it," Dario said. "Last chance to change your mind." Selene checked her Glock one final time. 13 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Backup weapon secured at her spine, vest tight beneath her jacket, heart hammering so hard she could taste it. "Let's go get my father." They walked the remaining distance on foot. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, all broken windows and rusted metal. Light spilled from open bay doors. Shadows moved inside, armed men taking positions, waiting for prey to walk into the trap. At the entrance, 2 of Constantine's people waited with metal detectors. "Arms up," one ordered. They complied. The detector screamed when it passed over Dario's concealed weapon. "Gun, slowly." Dario pulled out his primary weapon, a Beretta 92, and handed it over. They patted him down thoroughly, finding and confiscating 2 backup pieces and a knife. Then they turned to Selene. The detector wailed. Her Glock came out. Then the SIG from her spine. They missed the small blade taped to her inner thigh, hidden beneath jeans and wishful thinking. Inside, move. The warehouse interior was exactly as Selene remembered from the ambush weeks ago. Exposed beams, concrete floors, industrial lighting hanging from chains. But now it had been transformed into something more sinister. Armed men lined the perimeter. Constantine stood in the center like a spider in his web, silver hair perfectly styled, his suit immaculate. And beside him, zip-tied to a metal chair, was her father. Michael Vale looked worse than she'd ever seen him. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. Blood crusted his shirt. But he was alive, conscious. And when he saw Selene, something between relief and horror crossed his battered face. "Selene, no! Quiet!" Constantine gestured lazily, and one of his men backhanded Michael across the face. "We have so much to discuss, and interruptions are tiresome." Rage flooded through Selene so intensely her vision blurred. Dario's hand found hers, squeezing once, a warning to stay calm. "You have us both," Dario said. "Let him go." "Oh, I don't think so." Constantine circled them like a predator. "You see, I've realized something interesting. You, Dario, are willing to die, perhaps even eager for it, given the impossible situation I've created. But her?" He gestured at Selene. "She's your weakness, the thing that makes you desperate instead of dangerous. Leave her out of this." "But she's the whole point." Constantine's laugh was genuine. The great Dario Falcone, brought low by a woman he married as a transaction and somehow fell in love with. It's almost poetic. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand what happens when someone challenges my authority." Constantine pulled out a pistol and pressed it against Michael's temple. "I want you to watch me kill everyone you love, starting with dear old Dad." Selene's heart stopped. "Wait, please, by all means, beg. It makes this so much more satisfying." Dario's entire body went rigid. "You kill him, you lose your leverage." "Do I? I still have her." Constantine's smile was cruel. "And based on the way you're looking at me right now, I'd say that's more than enough." The gun cocked. Selene's hand moved without conscious thought. The blade from her thigh slid free, and she threw it with strength born from desperation and 6 hours of training and love stronger than the fear trying to paralyze her. The knife buried itself in Constantine's shoulder. He screamed. The gun discharged into the ceiling. Chaos erupted. Dario moved like lightning, tackling the nearest guard and stripping his weapon in one fluid motion. Selene dove for her father, her fingers working at the zip ties while bullets started flying. "Get down!" Dario roared, laying down suppressing fire. The warehouse exploded into a firefight. Constantine's men scattered for cover, returning fire from behind industrial equipment. Selene got one of her father's hands free before she had to abandon him and roll behind a concrete pillar, bullets chewing chunks out of the floor where she'd been kneeling. "Selene!" Dario threw her a gun, one of the confiscated weapons. She caught it midair and immediately returned fire, her training kicking in like muscle memory she'd downloaded overnight. One of Constantine's men went down. Then another. But there were too many. For every one that fell, 2 more appeared from hidden positions. They were being surrounded, boxed in, systematically eliminated. Then the bay doors exploded inward. Lucia burst through with a tactical team, body armor and automatic weapons, moving with military precision. The fight shifted instantly. Constantine's people found themselves caught between Dario's fury and Lucia's overwhelming firepower. But in the chaos, Constantine had recovered. Blood streamed from his shoulder where Selene's knife still protruded, but his face was twisted with rage instead of pain. He grabbed Michael, pressing his pistol against the older man's head. "Enough!" The roar cut through the gunfire. "Everyone stop shooting, or Michael Vale's brain matter decorates this floor." The warehouse went quiet except for the ringing in Selene's ears. Constantine backed toward a rear exit, dragging Michael with him. "You think you've won? You think bringing reinforcements changes anything?" His laugh was unhinged. "I'm walking out of here with the father. If anyone follows, he dies. If anyone shoots, he dies. You want him alive? You let me go." Dario's gun stayed trained on Constantine's head. "You're not walking out of here." "Then his blood is on your hands." Selene's mind raced. Constantine was 15 feet away, using her father as a human shield. Even Dario's exceptional aim couldn't guarantee a clean shot that wouldn't hit Michael. They were trapped in a stalemate where the only move was surrender. Or was it?
Take me instead, Selene said. Every head turned. What? Dario's voice was hollow. Let my father go. Take me as your hostage. Selene stepped into the open, hands raised. I'm worth more to you alive anyway. Leverage against Dario.
Selene, don't. Interesting. Constantine's eyes gleamed. The little bird volunteers for the cage. Let him go and I'll walk out of here with you. No fight, no resistance. Selene, no! Dario started toward her, but Lucia grabbed his arm. Boss, don't... He shook her off violently. I'm not letting her... It's my choice, Selene said, her eyes locked on Dario's. Trust me.
The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Trust me. Like she'd trusted him when he said her father would be safe. Like she'd trusted him to teach her how to survive his world. Like she'd trusted him with her body last night in a cabin that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. Trust me. Dario's jaw worked, his gun wavered, and Selene saw the exact moment he understood what she was really asking for. He lowered the weapon.
Smart man, Constantine said. Come here, Mrs. Falcone, slowly. Selene walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands trembled. But her mind was crystal clear. She'd made her choice. When she reached Constantine, he shoved Michael forward. The older man stumbled, and Lucia's team caught him before he fell. Then Constantine's arm wrapped around Selene's throat, his gun pressed against her temple. Now we leave, he said. Anyone follows, she dies. They backed toward the exit. Selene caught Dario's eyes one last time, trying to communicate everything she couldn't say aloud. I love you. I'm sorry, trust me. Then they were through the door and into the night. A car waited in the alley, black sedan, engine running, driver already behind the wheel. Constantine shoved Selene into the back seat and climbed in beside her, his gun never wavering. Drive, he ordered. The car accelerated. Selene's hands were zip-tied in front of her. The blade from her thigh was long gone, buried in Constantine's shoulder. She had no weapons, no backup, no way to escape, except the one she'd planned for. You're bleeding pretty badly, she said, her voice steady. Shut up. That knife might have hit something important. Brachial artery, maybe. You should get medical attention. I said shut up. Or you could just bleed out in the next 20 minutes. She shrugged. Your choice. Constantine's face was pale beneath the streetlights flashing past. His shirt was soaked with blood. The knife wound was worse than he'd been letting on. What do you care? He hissed. I don't. But I'm also not stupid enough to die in a car crash when you pass out behind. She moved. Her zip-tied hand shot forward, grabbing the steering wheel and yanking hard right. The car swerved violently. Constantine's wounded shoulder slammed against the door. He screamed. The gun went off, punching a hole through the roof. The driver lost control. They hit a parked car at 40 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded. Selene's head cracked against the seat in front of her, stars bursting across her vision. Then silence. Selene tasted blood. Her ears rang. Every inch of her body screamed. But she was conscious. Alive. Beside her, Constantine was slumped against the door, blood running from a gash on his forehead, his eyes unfocused. The driver wasn't moving at all. She found the gun on the floor and picked it up with trembling, zip-tied hands. Outside, sirens wailed. Footsteps pounded on pavement. Car doors slammed. Selene! Dario's voice. Closer than it should be. He must have followed despite Constantine's threats. She kicked open the door and stumbled into the street. Dario caught her before she fell, his hands framing her face, checking for injuries. I'm okay? She pressed the gun into his hands. Constantine's inside, still breathing. Dario looked past her at the wrecked car, then back at her face, something like awe flickering through the fear and rage. You crashed the car on purpose. You said to use every advantage. Her smile was weak. Turns out being underestimated is a pretty good advantage. He kissed her then, desperate and relieved and terrified all at once. When they finally broke apart, Lucia was pulling Constantine from the wreckage, her gun trained on his head. Boss, she called, what do you want me to do with him? Dario's expression went cold. He pulled away from Selene and walked to where Constantine knelt on the pavement, bleeding and defeated. You threatened my wife, Dario said quietly. You took her father. You killed my people. He pulled out a pistol and pressed it against Constantine's temple. Any last words? Constantine spat blood. You think this ends with me? There are others, bigger players. You've won one battle, but the war... Dario pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the Brooklyn night. Constantine's body crumpled to the pavement. Selene turned away, her stomach churning, but she didn't regret what she'd done to make this moment possible. Some monsters didn't deserve mercy. Clean this up, Dario told Lucia. Make it disappear. Already on it. He walked back to Selene, his face unreadable. Your father's being taken to a real hospital, armed security, the best doctors I can buy. Thank you. Don't thank me. This is my fault. All of it. No. She grabbed his bloody hand. This is Constantine's fault. And it's over now. Is it? His amber eyes were hollow. You crashed a car tonight, Selene, gave yourself a concussion, and probably cracked ribs to create an opening for me to execute someone. That's not the woman I married. No, it's the woman you helped me become. I didn't want this for you. Too bad. She stepped closer, ignoring the pain screaming through her body. You don't get to decide what I'm capable of. I do. For a long moment, they stood in the wreckage of the night, surrounded by broken glass and Constantine's corpse and the flashing lights of emergency vehicles converging from all directions. We need to go, Lucia called. Police are 2 minutes out. Gulchi? Dario helped Selene into a waiting SUV. As they pulled away from the scene, she caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. 2 people covered in blood and ash, holding on to each other like the world might end if they let go. Maybe it would. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Selene realized she wasn't afraid of the ending anymore. She was afraid of what came after. The safe house in Queens smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Selene sat on a worn couch while a doctor Dario actually trusted, not the kind who sold information to enemies, examined her injuries under fluorescent lights that made everything look corpse pale. 3 cracked ribs, moderate concussion, lacerations across her arms from the car crash, bruises blooming across her torso in shades of purple and yellow that would take weeks to fade. You're lucky, the doctor said, wrapping her ribs with practiced efficiency. Could have been much worse. Lucky. The word felt obscene given everything that had happened. Across the room, Dario stood by the window, his phone pressed to his ear, coordinating the cleanup of Constantine's death with the kind of cold precision that came from years of practice. His shirt was still stained with blood. Some his, some hers, some Constantine's. He hadn't changed, hadn't slept, hadn't stopped moving since they'd left Brooklyn 3 hours ago. When the doctor finally left with instructions about pain medication and rest, Selene found herself alone with Dario for the first time since she'd crashed that car. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with things neither knew how to say. Your father's stable, Dario said without turning from the window. The hospital confirmed it 20 minutes ago. Minor dehydration, some bruising, but nothing permanent. They're keeping him for observation. Thank you. Don't. His voice was flat. Don't thank me for cleaning up a mess I created. You didn't create Constantine. No, but I created the situation that made you a target. He finally turned to look at her, and the exhaustion in his face was devastating. I turned you into someone who crashes cars and hands me guns and watches executions without flinching. That's on me. Selene stood, ignoring the pain screaming through her ribs. You didn't turn me into anything. I made my own choices. Choices I forced you into. Stop. She crossed the room and grabbed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. I chose to crash that car. I chose to throw that knife. I chose to stay with you when I could have run a dozen times. Her voice was steady. You don't get to take responsibility for my agency just because it makes you feel better about the guilt. I got Marco killed. Almost got your father killed. Almost got you killed. And I'm still here. We're both still here. She pressed her forehead against his. So now what? The question hung between them like a precipice neither knew how to cross. I don't know, Dario admitted. For the first time in 20 years, I actually don't know what comes next. Then we figure it out together. It's not that simple. It never is. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was made of glass that might shatter under too much pressure. When they finally broke apart,
His amber eyes held something she'd never seen before. Fear. Not of enemies or violence or death. Fear of hope. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About that night. When I first saw you at the hospital." Selene waited.
"I wasn't there visiting one of my people. That was a lie." Dario's hands trembled against her face. "I was there because my mother died in that hospital 23 years ago. Same floor, same wing. I go back every year on the anniversary and just sit there, remembering." The confession landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward.
"You saw me by accident," Selene said. "Yes, you were in the cafeteria at 3 in the morning, eating terrible food and reading a journal article, and you looked so—" He stopped, struggling for words. "You looked like someone who still believed hard work mattered, like the system hadn't broken you yet." "It had. I just hid it better."
"No? You fought it. That's different." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "When your father's debts crossed my desk 6 weeks later, I saw an opportunity to save someone the way I couldn't save her, to rewrite the story with a different ending. That's not fair to either of us. I know, but I'm not good at fair. I'm good at control and power and building walls so high nothing gets through." His voice dropped. "Until you." Selene's chest ached. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the contract marriage was always a lie. From the very first moment. I didn't choose you because you were convenient or clean or forgettable." He stepped back, giving her space. "I chose you because even then, before I knew your name, I knew you were the kind of person who could make me want to be better than what I am." "Dario." "And I'm saying that terrifies me, because everyone I've ever cared about either dies or gets destroyed by proximity to my world. My mother. Marco. Almost your father. Almost you." His hands curled into fists. "I don't know how to keep you safe and keep you close at the same time." The raw honesty broke something open inside Selene. She understood what he was really asking. Not whether she loved him, they'd already crossed that bridge. Whether she was willing to stay in a world where love was the most dangerous vulnerability a person could have. "You can't keep me safe," she said quietly. "Not completely. Not while you're still who you are." "I know. But you can stop treating me like something fragile that needs protecting." She moved closer, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "I crashed a car tonight, stabbed a man, watched you execute someone who threatened my family. You think I don't understand what your world costs?" "Understanding and surviving are different things." "Then teach me to survive." Dario stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. "You want to stay in this life. I want to stay with you. The life comes with the territory." "Selene, you can't—" "Can't what? Make my own choices about what risks I'm willing to take?" She grabbed his hands. "You spent 6 hours teaching me how to shoot, how to move, how to kill, if necessary. But you won't teach me how to actually exist in your world without treating me like a liability. You're not a liability. Then stop acting like I am." They stood there in the gray morning light filtering through dusty windows. Two people bound by a contract that had become real in ways neither had anticipated. Dario looked exhausted and wrecked, and more human than she'd ever seen him. "If you stay," he said finally, "everything changes. The penthouse, the staff, the way I conduct business. I can't have you close and keep you separated from the reality of what I do. I don't want separation. I want partnership. Partnership in an empire built on violence and corruption. Partnership with a man who plays piano when he thinks no one's listening, who moved my father to safety before I even asked, who taught me to defend myself instead of just hiding me away." Her voice softened. "I know what you are, Dario. All of it. And I'm choosing you anyway." Something cracked in his expression, the last wall finally coming down. He pulled her close, careful of her injuries, and held on like she was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." Her father was released from the hospital 4 days later. Selene sat beside his bed in the penthouse guest room, the same penthouse where this nightmare had started, now transformed into something that felt almost like home. Michael Vale looked older than she remembered, the trauma of his kidnapping carved into new lines around his eyes. But he was alive, whole,
Safe. Tell me the truth, he said quietly. What kind of man did you marry?
Selene could have lied, could have given him the sanitized version where Dario was just a successful businessman with complicated connections. But she was done with lies. The kind who kills people when they threaten what's his, she said. The kind who built an empire on things you'd rather not know about. The kind who terrifies everyone who knows his name. Her father's face went pale. And he's the kind who made sure you got treatment no amount of money could buy. Who moved you to safety when you were targeted because of me. Who's currently paying for round-the-clock security so nothing like this ever happens again. She took his hand. He's complicated, Dad, and dangerous, and not even remotely the kind of person you wanted me to marry. Do you love him? The question caught her off guard. Yes. Does he love you? Yes. Michael Vale studied her face for a long moment. Then I suppose I can't ask for much more than that. You're not angry? I'm terrified. For you. For what kind of life you're choosing. He squeezed her hand. But I'm also looking at a daughter who survived being kidnapped, who crashed a car to escape, who's sitting here with cracked ribs and a concussion and still hasn't broken. That's not the girl I raised. That's a woman who made herself strong enough to survive anything. Tears burned Celine's eyes. I'm still me, Dad. I know. You're just more yourself than you used to be. He smiled weakly. Even if that terrifies me. Dario appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. He'd finally showered and changed, the blood and violence washed away, replaced by the carefully controlled exterior Selene now recognized as armor against a world that had never shown him kindness. Mr. Vale, he said formally, how are you feeling? Like I've been through hell and barely made it back. Michael's eyes were sharp despite the exhaustion. But I understand I have you to thank for the barely made it back part. I'm the reason you went through hell in the first place. Yes, you are. No sugarcoating, no politeness, just brutal honesty. But you're also the reason my daughter is alive, so I suppose we're even. We're not even close to even. No, but it's a start. Michael's gaze shifted between them. Take care of her, or I'll find a way to make you regret it, no matter how powerful you are. Something like respect flickered across Dario's face. Understood. After her father fell asleep, Selene found Dario on the penthouse balcony, staring out at Manhattan like he was searching for answers in the skyline. The city sprawled beneath them, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, most of them oblivious to the violence that had unfolded in warehouses and alleys and hospital parking lots. What happens now? She asked. With your organization, with Constantine gone. Power vacuum. Other players will try to move into his territory. Dario's voice was matter-of-fact. I'll need to establish dominance quickly or risk another war. How? Carefully, strategically, with minimal bloodshed if possible. He glanced at her. You really want to know the details? Yes. So he told her. Laid out the brutal calculus of criminal empire building. Which alliances to forge, which enemies to eliminate, which territories to claim. He explained it like a chess game played with human lives, and Selene listened with the kind of focus she'd once reserved for medical research. This was her life now, understanding the mechanics of violence, learning the language of power. Becoming fluent in a world where contracts were signed in blood and betrayal was just another business expense. There's something else, Dario said. The FBI has been quiet. Too quiet. Constantine's death should have triggered investigations, but everything's gone silent. What does that mean? Could mean they're building a case. Could mean someone paid them to look the other way. Could mean they're waiting for the right moment to strike. He turned to face her. Point is, this isn't over. It's never really over. I know. You say that like you understand, but Selene, this is forever. There's no retirement plan. No walking away when things get difficult. This is the rest of your life. I know, she repeated. And you're okay with that? She thought about the question seriously. Thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, drowning in debt. Watching her father die slowly while the world moved on without caring. Thought about the woman she was now, standing on a penthouse balcony beside a man who'd killed for her, who she'd nearly died for, who looked at her like she was simultaneously his salvation and his damnation. No, she admitted. I'm not okay with it, but I'm choosing it anyway. Why? Because the alternative is going back to a world where I pretend to be weaker than I am, where I smile and nod and let other people make decisions about my life. She stepped closer. I'd rather be terrified and powerful than safe and invisible. Dario's expression softened into something almost like pride. You're going to be dangerous. I learned from the best. He kissed her as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. I need to tell you one more thing, he said quietly. What? The contract. The one we signed at the courthouse. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I'm destroying it. Selene stared at the document, their marriage certificate creased from being carried close. Why? Because I don't want you bound to me by obligation or debt or fear of what happens if you leave. His hands trembled slightly. I want you to stay because you choose to, every day, knowing exactly what that choice costs. And if I choose to leave, then you leave. I'll make sure you and your father are protected and provided for, and I'll let you go. His amber eyes held hers. But it has to be your choice, not a contract, not a transaction, a choice. He held out a lighter. Selene took the marriage certificate from his hands. Read through the legal language that had bound them together through chaos and violence and something that had somehow become love. Then she flicked the lighter and held the flame to the corner of the paper. They watched it burn together. When only ash remained, Selene pulled Dario close and kissed him with intention. Not because a contract said she had to, not because circumstances forced her, but because she wanted to. I'm staying, she said against his mouth. Why? Because you're worth it. This, us, is worth it. Even knowing what it costs? Especially knowing what it costs. 3 months later, Selene stood in a different hospital, this time by choice, this time as a visitor rather than a desperate daughter. Her father had regained most of his strength, the physical therapy and experimental treatments Dario had funded working better than anyone expected. He'd never be completely the same, but he was alive and laughing and learning to play chess with a level of obsessive focus that reminded Selene where she'd inherited her own intensity. He's doing well, the doctor, a new one, carefully vetted, reported. At this rate, we're looking at a full discharge within the month. Where will he go? Dario asked from beside her. It was a question they'd been dancing around for weeks. The penthouse wasn't suitable for long-term recovery, but sending Michael back to his old apartment felt wrong after everything that had happened. I've been thinking, Dario said carefully. There's a brownstone in Park Slope. Quiet street, good neighborhood, accessible for someone with mobility challenges. I could acquire it, set it up properly. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. His hand found hers. He's family now. That means something. Family. The word still felt strange in Dario's mouth, like a language he was learning phonetically without quite understanding the grammar, but he was trying. That had to count for something. Later, as they drove back to the penthouse through evening traffic, Selene's phone buzzed. A message from Lucia. The FBI investigation closed. Officially ruled Constantine's death as gang-related violence. No charges filed. You're clear. She showed the message to Dario. His expression didn't change, but she felt the tension leave his shoulders. It's over, she said quietly. This chapter is over. There will be others. I know. They drove in comfortable silence through a city that had tried to kill them both and somehow failed. When they finally reached the penthouse, Dario didn't immediately head for his office like usual. Instead, he led Selene to the library, the room where she'd first discovered the photograph of his mother, where they'd had their first real argument, where so many walls had started to crack. The piano sat in the corner where it had always been, untouched since the night she'd heard him playing in the Forbidden West Wing. Play something, Selene said. Why? Because I want to hear it, the real you, not the version you show the world. Dario sat at the piano bench slowly, like approaching something sacred he'd abandoned for too long. His fingers found the keys, and after a moment's hesitation, he began to play. The melody was different from what she'd heard before. Less mournful, more searching, like someone navigating darkness and finding unexpected light.
Selene sat beside him on the bench, her head on his shoulder, and listened to him pour out everything he couldn't say in words. When the music finally stopped, they sat in silence for a long moment. My mother used to say that music was how the soul spoke when words weren't enough, Dario said quietly. I stopped believing that when she died. Figured my soul didn't have anything worth saying. And now? Now I think maybe she was right. He turned to look at Selene. Maybe some things can only be said in music, or in actions, or in the space between heartbeats when two people choose each other despite every rational reason not to. Selene kissed him softly. What did the music say? That I'm terrified of losing you. That you make me want to be better than what I am. That for the first time in 23 years, I can imagine a future that doesn't end in violence. His voice was raw. And that I love you in a way that makes every other feeling I've ever had seem like practice. Tears streamed down Selene's face. The music said all that? The music said that. I'm just translating. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other in a library full of books neither of them read, finding peace in the quiet moments between the violence that defined Dario's world and the love that was slowly redefining it. Book. 6 months after the night Constantine died, Selene stood in a different kind of room entirely. Not a warehouse or a hospital or a penthouse library, but a small chapel in upstate New York surrounded by trees turning gold with early autumn. No press, no excessive guests, just her father in a wheelchair, Lucia standing as witness, and a judge who owed Dario enough favors to perform the ceremony without asking questions. This time there were flowers. This time there were vows they actually meant. Do you, Dario Falcone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled when he slid the ring onto her finger, a simple band of platinum that had belonged to his mother, the only piece of her he'd kept all these years. And do you, Selene Vale, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She looked at Dario and saw everything he was. The violence and the music, the walls and the cracks, the man who'd bought her like property and somehow learned to love her like salvation. I do. By the power vested in me by the state of New York, I now pronounce you husband and wife. This time, the kiss was real. Soft and lingering and full of promises neither had to fake. Outside, rain began to fall, gentle autumn rain that smelled like earth and new beginnings. They stood under the chapel overhang while Lucia brought the car around, Dario's arm around Selene's waist, both of them watching water transform the world into something clean and temporary. Do you regret it? Dario asked quietly. Any of it? Selene thought about Marco dying in a parking lot, about crashing a car with Constantine bleeding beside her, about learning to shoot and kill and make choices that would have horrified the woman she'd been a year ago, about choosing love in a world built on violence and somehow making that choice matter. No, she said honestly. I regret that people died. I regret that it had to be so brutal. But I don't regret you, us, this. Even knowing what's still coming, the FBI might stay quiet now, but there will be others. Other Constantine, other wars, other nights when we barely make it home alive. Even knowing that, why? It was the same question he'd asked a dozen times in a dozen different ways. Why stay? Why choose this? Why love someone whose world consumed everything it touched? Because, Selene said, turning to face him fully, I spent my whole life trying to be good, following rules, playing it safe, being the kind of daughter and student and person who never made waves. And where did it get me? Drowning in debt, watching my father die, too afraid to fight back against a system designed to crush people like us. She grabbed his lapels, pulling him close. You taught me that power isn't evil. It's just power. And the people who have it decide what it becomes. Her voice was fierce. So I'm choosing to have power, to stand beside someone who understands how the world actually works instead of how it pretends to work, to love dangerously instead of safely. That's not an answer most people would give. I'm not most people anymore. No. Dario's smile was slow and genuine. You're definitely not. The car arrived. They climbed inside and drove back toward Manhattan, toward the penthouse that had transformed from a prison into a home, toward a future neither could predict but both had chosen. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a foundation was being established in Marco's name. scholarships for kids from Hell's Kitchen who needed a way out. Selene had insisted, and Dario had agreed without argument. One small act of goodness to balance the violence. It wouldn't bring Marco back, but it meant something. Somewhere in Park Slope, a brownstone was being renovated for her father. Accessible ramps, medical equipment, a garden where he could sit and remember what it felt like to be safe. Somewhere in the city, Dario's empire continued to function. Power consolidated. Territories claimed, the machinery of organized crime grinding forward with or without their attention. But here, in the back of a car driving through autumn rain, Selene and Dario existed in a space between worlds. Not quite criminals, not quite innocent. Just two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and decided that love, complicated, dangerous, real love, was worth every risk. "I have something for you," Dario said, pulling a small box from his jacket. Selene opened it to find a key. Simple, unremarkable, the kind of key that could open anything or nothing. "What's this?" "The cabin in the Adirondacks, where we—" He stopped, something almost like embarrassment crossing his face. "Where everything changed. I bought it outright. Put it in your name only. Why?"
거기에 지금
"Because you need something that's completely yours. Somewhere you can go if you ever need to escape. From me. From this life. From everything." His amber eyes held hers. "I meant what I said about choice, Selene. You stay because you want to, not because you're trapped." She closed her fingers around the key and pulled Dario into a kiss that tasted like rain and promises, and the kind of love that survived despite every reason it shouldn't. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered against his mouth. "Promise?" "Promise." The car carried them through a city that had tried to break them and somehow made them stronger, past warehouses where they'd nearly died, past hospitals where they'd nearly lost everything, past all the places where their story could have ended but didn't. And when they finally reached the penthouse 70 floors above Manhattan, Dario carried Selene over the threshold like this was the first time instead of the second, like the contract marriage had been a rehearsal, and this choice made freely, this love built on honesty instead of desperation, was the real beginning. In the living room, he set her down gently and just held her, his forehead against hers, both of them breathing in sync. "What happens now?" Selene asked. It was the question that had haunted them from the very beginning. What happens now? After the contract? After the violence? After everything they'd survived and sacrificed and chosen? "Now," Dario said, his voice soft but certain, "we live. We build something real out of the wreckage. We make the choice to love each other every single day, knowing exactly what it costs. And when the next threat comes, we face it together. And when I'm scared, I'll remind you how strong you are. And when you forget you're human, you'll play piano with me and make me remember." They swayed together in the gathering darkness, the city lights beginning to glow like stars below them. Somewhere in the penthouse, staff moved quietly, giving them privacy. Somewhere in the world, threats were building and enemies were plotting, and the future was assembling itself into shapes neither could predict. But here, now, in this moment carved out of violence and choice and love that refused to be reasonable, Selene and Dario had everything that mattered, each other, and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built, no matter what came next. Outside, rain continued to fall across Manhattan, washing away blood and ash and the last remnants of who they'd been before fate and desperation and a courthouse wedding had brought them together. Thunder rolled across the sky like applause from a universe that appreciated good drama. Selene pulled back just enough to look at Dario's face, the sharp angles softened by shadows, the amber eyes that had once been cold now burning with something warmer. "I love you," she said. Not because she had to, not because a contract demanded it, but because it was the truest thing she knew. "I love you too," Dario replied. "God help us both." "We don't need help." Selene's smile was fierce. "We have each other." And in the end, surrounded by the empire he'd built and the love they'd chosen, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.